That fly's done this to troll me. Hint it though.
It's quite funny.
It's not. Bailey's going to knock my drink off. It's going to be another disaster of a wrap-up. Class. Hi and welcome to BookTube with Simon and Amy. This is my end of month wrap up. So first up I read an absolute chonker of a book. I read To Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini. I had obviously my Raven Boys binge at the beginning of the month, so I felt like a wee sci-fi to just sort of break away for the YA would be good. So I didn't really know how I feel about it. So on the one hand, I think that the story was done really well. I did enjoy the story, however, I hated the main character. Like, I didn't care about her story, I cared about how what was happening to her affected all the other characters that you met, and I cared about them, and I really hated her. And I know that in YA and sci-fi, a lot of the main female protagonists are a wee bit annoying, and that's fine, like I can get on board with that, but I feel like he did her dirty. She was so annoyingly written. I don't think that anybody could have read this book and liked her character. But I mean, if you did, let me know. But I don't think you're out there watching, because she was rotten. So you meet her, she's in a relationship, she's engaged, grand, and then, oh, I didn't want to spoil what happens. Fuck it, I'm doing it. So you meet her and she is in a relationship, she's engaged, she's on this space station, she's dealing with the conflict of being in a relationship and them being stationed in separate space stations on separate missions, and it's about how they can try and get posted in the same place so that they can be together. First long distance relationship in space I've ever heard of, so class, whatever. Then really quickly it all goes downhill, and she is getting inhabited by an alien host. She goes back to her spaceship, the alien host that's in her freaks out and kills everybody on board, including her fiance, which is quite a tragic thing to happen, and I am on her side up until now. So she's killed everybody, she's understandably upset about it, and that's grand. That's the reaction you would expect for somebody to have. Then she meets this other crew of people, and then they all die, and then she meets another crew of people and they all die, and then she meets another crew of people but they didn't all die, and so this is the crew that she sticks with for most of the book, which I was relieved at, because I was sort of getting a wee bit peeved off with getting to know a wee handful of characters and their backstories and who they are for them all just to die and then move on to somebody else. And I was like, see, if it's like this for the full book, I'm just not going to engage, because you know I need that character connection, and I wasn't getting it for her. So the characters that you meet are really good. So I really like Falcone, I really like Trig, I really like Sparrow, and I really like Grigorovich. They are my ultimate wee foursome. I really connected to them the most. So she ends up on a ship with them and a couple others, and our story just takes a turn for the bizarre. So obviously everybody is a stranger, she doesn't know anybody, they didn't know her, and she's trying to hide the fact that she's been inhabited by an alien. Because I mean, you would. So then Christopher Paolini talks about her backstory, and she basically is like, oh, I've always been an outsider and I've never been close to anybody, so being an outsider here's abso-fine. But in the first paragraph of the book, she spoke about how everybody on her ship's like family and how they're all so close, and she's got this fiance, so how's she an outsider? Like, it totally just diminishes everything that she had, the relationships that she had with the characters in the beginning of the story. So therefore, their deaths mean less. Then she talks about her fiancé, and she talks about her fiancé a lot through the book, which you would expect. She killed him, she's gutted. But then she starts talking about how when she was lonely on ships, she'd just get steaming and like fuck about with guys on the ship. Which like is grand as a life choice, but you've also spoke about how you've been in a relationship for 10 years. So at what point were you getting steaming and fucking about? Was it, well, you were in a relationship with this guy, or like what's the script? So again, that just doesn't really make sense to me, because he's tried to make her like wee bit of a player, but then also committed to a marriage. So like, pick a backstory and stick to it. Is my issue, because I just felt like you never really knew where Kira lay. So then that made all the choices that she made a wee bit harder for me to follow, because I was like, right, well, what Kira are we getting? And can I get that you can like have fucked about and then get married, and that would have been if it was described that way, but like it just wasn't. It was weird. And then probably the thing that really pissed me off the most, so she is being inhabited by an alien, which is inherently interesting and cool, and obviously you would be interested to know how the alien has changed your physique and stuff. But the first time she sees herself in a mirror, and this is not too long after she has realised that she's also killed her fiancé and everybody she's ever loved on this ship, all your pals and that, she's like, oh, woe is me, nobody will ever want to bang me again. And it's like, you're being inhabited by an alien and you're concerned about who's going to want to pump you. Like, it just didn't make sense at all. And I just don't think that she was written well. I think that if somebody else had written the character, they probably wouldn't have phrased things the way that he chose to have phrased them, and probably she would be less concerned about who's going to want to pump her right after she realises she's killed her fiancé, who she's been with for 10 years, and you're led to believe loves and can't live without. Just doesn't really make sense to me. But if you ignore all that, it was no bad. So it was far too long. I felt like the book could have been half the length and I would have got just as much out of it. There's so much backstory you just didn't need. You get backstory for every single person you meet. Every single person you meet. Aliens that you meet, you get backstory for. And I just feel like unless they're in your main cast, you didn't need that much backstory. And I just feel as well there's just so much gibberish. Like, you can't just learn about an alien race without learning about their origins and where they come from, and their religion and their belief system and their language, and where their language comes from, where their technology comes from, and then how that ties into the story. And there's quite a few aliens that come into it through the story. It's not just the one species of alien. And that just wasn't particularly interesting to me. I just felt like we'd get so far along in the journey and you could see a bit of an end in sight, and then it would be like, oh, but there's another species of aliens, or oh, there's another political ship involved. And then you get to know that subsection of this wee society. And I just felt like there probably wasn't a need. And there was so much chat about the technology and how that works. Now, I don't read a huge amount of sci-fi. It's something that I do want to get more into. So maybe that's just how sci-fi books work. I just don't need 50 pages on how a computer works or how a specific system in space works. I'm there for the story, I'm there for the characters, I'm there for their discovery. Like 50 pages on a computer system just doesn't interest me. So overall I ended up giving the book a 3 stars, just because I felt it could have been half the length, and I didn't really like how they portrayed Kira. I feel like they did Kira dirty. However, if you like sci-fi and you didn't mind reading hundreds of pages about computers and systems and languages, then give it a go. I just felt like it was about 15 hours of my life that I'll probably not get back, because the audiobook is like 32 hours long. You only need to listen to about 15 hours of it. So, aye. So next up I read another NetGalley book, because I'm still an awful mood reader and all of our books are still in boxes and it makes me sad. So next up I read Rebel, The Extraordinary Life of a Child in the Children of God Cult by Faith Morgan. quite a mouthful of a title. But I've read quite a lot of cult books over my years. I've never really read books about religious cults. I tend to go for the murdery cults, just because then it's a 2-for-1. It's a cult, which is just so interesting and fascinating to me, and then there's murder and true crime involved, which is just my bag. So I decided to give this one a go. I've watched a couple of documentaries before in the Children of God cult, and they're ones that I've sort of started and then I've never really finished, so I felt like the book could be quite interesting. And it was actually written by one of the survivors, so she actually did grow up in the cult. And again, any of the cult books that I've read, they're sort of merely like factual books. They're not written from a perspective of anybody who was involved in the cult. It's basically just and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and here's a picture. So this is the first one that I had read that was written by a survivor's perspective, and it was actually really cool. I felt like I had a totally different reading experience with this than I have done with other cult books that I've read in the past, because you see her being in the cult, being totally brainwashed, thinking that things aren't right. You get her whole process using outside the cult materials to challenge her own beliefs, to actually being like, no, this is totally wrong, to trying to come out of the cult, to standing against the cult, and then to where she is right now in her life, which I just found really interesting. And you get a chapter in the past for when she was in the cult, and then a chapter, well, still technically past because it was when she was younger, but then when she was out of the cult. And I really liked that wee switch, because you could see more how she was developing as a person, and how the things that she was experiencing as a child really then affected her when she was out of the cult. And it's the first one that I've read where you get like a full big chunk about the person that she is after, and it wasn't just about her experiences in it. And it really dove into how her and her mum, her dad and her siblings really struggled to reintegrate to society, and how she didn't even really realise that things were as messed up and that things had happened to her as much until she was married and she had kids, and her kids were asking her about her experiences, and they were saying like, no, like that's not right. And it was just really interesting to see that progression. And again, it's something that I've never really had in a culty book that I've read before, so I really enjoyed that. And I think as well, because it was for her perspective and she told you so much about her family and the people that she met through the cult, like you really rooted for them. And so it was really different for me, because I wasn't just reading it in a, oh my god, this is so mental, I can't believe this is happening, sort of a gross intrigue kind of way like I would usually read a cult book. I ended up getting really invested in her and wanting to find out like what she did next, so it made it really personal for me, and I felt like I really empathised with her and her siblings more than I ever had done before. So it totally changed the way that I viewed things, whereas usually I think I would just read it out of that like, oh my god, this is so fucked up type of headspace. I was actually reading it like, aye, this is fucked up, but these are people and this is a family going through this, and I had never really had that before. And there was parts of it where it was actually quite emotional when you were reading what she went through, and just like how totally brainwashed her parents were, and so then when the kids were challenging them, just how they were dealt with, and it was horrible. So it was a difficult read at times, but really, really worthwhile. I did absolutely enjoy it, and I think it was super interesting, like I said, that you got the big chunk at the end of her life, and you got to see her going to court and actually doing interviews and standing up against the cult. And again, you got to see, because she still knew people who were in the cult who then came out and sort of told the side of the story that was happening while she was trying to fight against the cult, and how their like PR people were trying to spin it like, oh no, it's not really that bad. And it was just super interesting. So I definitely recommend giving that a read when that comes out. That comes out on the 17th of June, so if you're interested in true crime and you're interested in real life survivor stories, give it a go. I rated it a 4 stars, I really enjoyed it, and it was just a really different reading experience to me for how I would usually sit down and read a cult book. Next up, I read The Ravens by Cass Morgan and Danielle Page. I've wanted to read this book a wee while. Olivia has spoken about it on her channel quite a lot, and she branded it like Scream Queens meets the Coven series, the American Horror Story. And I like horror story and I like Scream Queens, so I thought this seemed right up my street. I wouldn't say that description was dead on for me, but I really, really enjoyed the book. So It's got written from 2 different perspectives. You've got Vivi, who's just gone off to college. Her mum, she thinks, is a total wahoo. She's a psychic, she does tarot cards, they move around loads, and so Vivi's never really had a proper opportunity at education or at making friends and having any decent social life, because every time she gets used to being somewhere, her mum moves her again, and so she's just sick of being the new girl, and she decides that she wants to go, she wants to do college properly and actually settle down somewhere for a decent amount of time. Her mum is really dead against this and tries to stop her from going, but she goes anyway. And then you've got Scarlett. Her family have been involved in the sorority on this campus for years and years, called the Ravens. Her mum was president, her sister was president. This year she's hoping that she'll get president as well, so she's feeling like there's a lot of pressure on her this year to do well in school, to also do well in the sorority, so that when this year's president leaves, she names her as president for the next again year. And she's in charge of all of the pledges for this year, so she's pledge master, and she basically has to put all these girls through their paces and find out who is up to standard to join the sorority and get them to pledge. And the sorority aren't just sororities, otherwise it would be boring, but they're witches, so it makes it cool. So Vivi doesn't know that she is a witch, but when she goes to a Ravens party, she realises that she is. They basically do wee tests with them to gauge everybody's magic level, and anybody who doesn't have any sense of magic gets papped out, and anybody who does have a sense of magic is urged to pledge to the sorority. And then they have a thing called Hell Week, and basically they do more and more tests with these girls over the course of the week, and the people who display the most power end up getting into the sorority. So of course Vivi pledges and she gets into the sorority, but it's not quite as it seems. There's a wee bit of a mystery element to this, and I'll not say too much just because it's quite a twisty turny book, and again, no something that I would usually be interested in. Usually I'm like, no, just give me the story. I don't want to have to read an entire book to find out what's happening, but I really enjoyed it. Don't know what's happened to me. I feel like I'm enjoying books recently that ordinarily I would hate, so new reading tests, who knows. But so it's really suspenseful, there's quite a few twists and turns in it, and it's not something that you can really see coming. So I really enjoyed it. I really liked the magical element in it. I felt like the magic system was really well explained, and I really liked how they linked it to the tarot cards as well, and linked it to all the different suits in the tarot cards, and how they linked that to elemental magic. It was really interesting to me. I'd never really seen a magic system quite like that in a book before. It's the first in a series. Of course it is. So the second one's out next year, and I will definitely read the second one. I rated this a 5 stars. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. The characters were really well developed, and for it being a college setting, which is not something that I really particularly enjoy. I usually find college settings, especially with girls, to be too bitchy for my liking, and I didn't really read books for like bitchy drama. It's not my bag, so I wasn't sure if that would be too big a part of the story, but there's actually like none of that really, which is brilliant. And it's dual perspective, so you get chapters from Vivi's perspective and then you get chapters from Scarlett's perspective as well. So it was an absolutely fantastic read. So if you do like YA, if you like witches and magical creatures, get a read. It was class. Then I read Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. Not going to talk too much about it because it's going to be a book 101 in our book 101 series. I rated it a 5 stars. I adore Little Women, and I was so hoping that this was going to be the classic that would just make Simon fall in love with classics, but you'll just need to watch book 101 to see whether or not I managed to persuade him to keep it out. Then I read another NetGalley book. So I had finished all my NetGalley books. Rebel was the last one that I had for my last binge request. So I was like, oh, we'll have a wee nosy and see if anything else is on. And I have like the awful habit of just requesting like 20 books that I see. I feel like I'll be on it and there'll be nothing for ages, and then there'll be like 20 that I want to read. So then I request them all, and I'm like, oh, maybe get a couple and that'll do me for my bus reads. I like reading them while I'm on my way to work and coming home from work on my phone, so I do have to take an extra book in my bag with all my paperwork. And then I ended up getting accepted for like most of them, so now I'm just like stressfully trying to read them so I can get through them all before I run out of time. The next one I read was The Smallest of Bones, and that's by Holly Lynn Walrath, and this is actually a collection of poems. I do like poetry, Philip Larkin, Sylvia Plath, I love Shakespeare sonnets, probably my three ultimates when it comes to poetry, so quite a bit of a mix. I didn't have like a particular type of poetry that I like or a particular style. I just think that if I like their flow and the topics are interesting, then I'm on board with it. And I know that poetry is completely subjective, so people will maybe read a poem and get absolutely nothing for it, and somebody else can read the exact same poem and be like, oh my god, that was so touching. And it's just, I guess, what you take out of it. So I thought that this would be a cool wee read. Every part of it starts off with like a description of a bone, and then it talks about different poems relating, well, not relating to that bit of the bone, but I guess themed around that bit of the bone in your body, and it delves into various themes. So there's some romantic poems in there, there's some queer poems in there, touches on death, touches on sex, loads of different themes, and I thought that could be a cool wee interesting read, but it was unfortunately terrible, so that was awful. I didn't like a single poem. It was, I didn't actually even feel like it was a poetry book. I really didn't. I feel like it was a poetry book if all the form of poetry that we had came from Tumblr. Like, it was written with a Tumblr user in mind. I don't feel like the author sat down to write a poem, they sat down to write a Tumblr quote that people would repost. That just so isn't my bag. Like, I didn't want something to be just so overly quotable. Like, I want it to actually have some sort of a substance, to have a wee bit of bite, to be thought-provoking, to be emotion-provoking, and there was just nothing. Every single poem, I think the longest poem was like 8 lines, and the shortest poem was like 3 lines. There was poems that were literally about 5 words, and it just was like a stream of consciousness almost of the author's thoughts, and none of the topics were coherent. They didn't blend into each other. Like, you'd read a poem on one page and it would have no correlation to the poem on the next page. It just felt like they didn't fit together. I feel like they could have been sectioned better even. I feel like, I don't even know how to describe how I feel. It was a waste of time. I'm glad it was only like 70 pages long, because it was just rotten. And I feel like she just had social media users in mind who would want to share like wee quotes about sad shit and no actual write a poem. It was like the most half-arsed poetry book I've ever read in my life. And it was just rotten. There was not a single poem that inspired anything in me other than the thought of going, this is pish. So aye, probably no for me. I rated it a 1 star. It's not really what I would look for in a book of poetry. Probably wouldn't pick up any other poetry by this author. I was looking her up on Goodreads and I had seen that she has released another couple of books that are collections of poetry, and I'll just no touch them, because I feel like they're just like so Instagrammable. It's no poetry. It's like poetry if we had only ever taken Facebook statuses into account. Mince. Then next up, I regret to inform the internet that I succumbed to peer pressure, and I read The Story of the Eye by George Bastille. Woo! Don't woo. You don't know what I've been through. You weren't there. I read it because Ange kept going on about it. And I believe it was read as part of Kieran Fikady Books' Booker Boy book club, and I obviously missed that month. Thankfully I missed that month, but I didn't get away unscathed. So I really like literature that pushes the boundaries, right? And it's the same with film and TV. Like, I'll watch something that's super violent or something that's super sexually graphic, and as long as it is interesting and it provokes something in me, it makes me think, then I'm like, oh, well that was quite interesting and I can see why they've done that. So I felt like this book was maybe going to be a bit like that. And it couldn't be as bad as everybody made it out to be. They were maybe just missing something. So super genius Amy here decided to buy it and read it. Woo! And she was wrong. It was the most dramatic book I've ever read in my life. I read it in 2 sittings and I could have read it in one because it's like 100 pages long, but I actually just had to pause at a point and be like, that is enough for today. Gross. Firstly, the piss per page ratio was way off because nobody could laugh, nobody could come, nobody could breathe apparently without pissing themselves. There was just so much piss and I just don't understand how people can piss themselves so much. Like, I've been alive 28 years and other than being in nappies, haven't pissed myself in any context, and I just don't feel there needs to be as much piss in a book that is only 100 pages. And like, we didn't kink shame here. If that's your bag, then grand. But I am such a nervous peer that like, I could not pee on demand for the life of me. Like if somebody was holding a gun to my head and was like, pee right now or I'm killing you, I'd need to blip, well shoot me, because I can't. Like, I'm one of the yins that likes to run the tap while I pee so that people can't even hear me pee. So like, there was just too much pish for me. And then I am quite an egg connoisseur, right? It's a running theme in our household about my obsession with eggs, because I went for years where I didn't like eggs. Don't know why, just couldn't stand them. And then all of a sudden, a few years ago, I had dippy eggs in toast and it changed my life. And ever since then, I eat probably about 6 eggs on average a week. Like to the point where we get eggs delivered to my milk. To my milk? I get eggs delivered with my milk. Simon's parents buy me egg related gifts for birthdays and Christmas. When we moved house, Simon bought me an egg cupboard. I'm egg obsessed. And this book took eggs and egg obsession to a level I didn't know possible. And that's all I'm saying on it, because I'll no traumatise you further, but it'll be a while before I eat a hard-boiled egg. Let me just say that. And then the ending. The ending. I read it and I just sat in silence for a wee while, and Simon was just looking at me like, are you alright? And I wasn't alright. That's maybe the most traumatising thing I've ever read in my life. Now, I have 2 fears, 2 big fears when it comes to horror films or books, right? One is things that didn't belong in your vag, gone in your vag. Tick. The other is anything involving damaging an eye or an eye leaving a socket. Tick. Horrifying. I can't believe I did this to myself, and frankly, I'll never forgive myself. I'll never look myself in the eye again. Awful. So I rated it a 1 star and I'm heavily traumatised. So I'm scurrying away back into my YA hovel for a while just to recover. So I think that the beginning of the month was definitely better than the end of the month, but the Ravens and Rebel were class, so I'm taking it as a win. Hope that you are having a good weekend, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Hopefully, no more traumatising books. Bye. Fucking awful book, man.